Welcome back to my channel. If you've been here before, if you haven't, well, welcome. These are my Christmas videos for the Christmas season of 2022, but hopefully they'll be viewed for many seasons after that. Today's video is about a letter that I wrote, actually, as my real name is Elizabeth, and in second grade is when there were 5 other Elizabeths, the teacher's like, you are not an Elizabeth, you are a Betsy. Probably because of my sanguine personality. I like to talk, I like people, I like to move around. So that has stuck with me, even though my dad loved the name Elizabeth and tried to change it back at 18 to me being called that. It's still my legal name. And my mom was like, don't you remember what the teacher said? And at the end of the day, my father was like, you are not an Elizabeth, you are a Betsy. And so it stuck with me, even though, like, as I've said, I am going to be 65 on the 4th, which I can't believe. I don't feel like it inside my brain. Anyway, I had a challenging growing up year, even though let's just say it was interesting. I had a great life till I was 6. And after that, there's some very significant things that happened, and you can find out by looking on my playlist for my testimony of my story and how, what happened in my life and how God changed all of that. And you can find that out there. So because of that happening to me, and me as a child saying, I know what it's like to hurt and I never want anybody else to hurt, I've always had a heart for other people and a heart to help those who've been hurting, and never ever to forget what it's like to be mistreated. So this letter is kind of reflective. It's reflective of my life, but it's my letters from Great Aunt Lizzie are letters from me that started out in actuality as sending a funny letter to a young gal that I was tutoring at a church camp. And I just laughed so hard, and her mother laughed at that letter so hard. And she said, Betsy, you need to create this character. So I did create Great Aunt Lizzie. Now, just so you know, don't confuse me. There's Great Aunt Lizzie over the pond, as they would say in Great Britain. That's not me. But that's my name too. So I'm going to use it. Anyways, I'm Great Lizzie from the United States. Okay. Now, I haven't written my book yet, although I have a friend that's like, what are you waiting on? So this is for that dear friend and for those who have encouraged me to write. It's called The Lights of Christmas. Dearest Ellie, oh, how I love this time of year and all the lights of Christmas. And my dear, I know you love it as much as me. I imagine your mom, dad, brothers, and sisters are all in a flurry of activity. Lord knows all the festive decorating that goes on in homes, churches, businesses, in that small but busy town. All the bustling to get ready for Christmas, the big celebration of the Christ child's birth, baby Jesus, that babe that changed the world and all eternity. Darling of my heart, you have known me as always joy-filled. You like to tell me when I visit that the house is bright with laughter within minutes of my arrival. But love, it was not always so. There was a time in my life where darkness visited me often and brought with it fear and terror. So dark was it at times, it seemed to shut out the light completely. The darkness came through deep fears in my heart and mind of my father. It was not always like that. From my birth to somewhere between 6 and 7 years old, my home was a bright and happy place. My mother was a wonderful cook, and the house was always clean and pleasant looking. My father was my hero with his dark brown hair and sparkling blue eyes. One of my aunts, my father's sister, told me once as I scrambled up a tree, I was my father's little teacup. By the look in her eyes, I knew it was a very good thing to be, and I smiled with a big grin on my face and an even bigger one in my heart. There was no doubt my parents loved us children. Picnics, parties, stories read to us, and songs sang to us. Oh, how I loved my mother's singing as she held and rocked me in time to the songs. My father bounced me on his knees as together we sang about Cowboy Bill. The song ended with his bumping me up and down on his knees as we galloped together over the range with Cowboy Bill. I would laugh and beg for another time. He would always oblige until, worn out, he hugged me to his chest, laughing. Other times he whisked me about the kitchen, my small feet on his much larger ones. Round and round we went waltzing, a little princess clinging to the legs of her champion and prince. But then darkness came. It came after we moved far away from family and friends. My father had taken a job as a social worker. He seemed excited about helping others. It was what he had gone to many years of school for. My father was a very smart and well-educated man and gifted in writing and reading. My mother used to tell me about when they were dating and he would read poetry to her. She admitted to me with a giggle that she never understood a bit of it, but she loved hearing him read it to her. This job was a promise of fulfilling his desire to help others suffering from unexpected predicaments in life. We were sad to leave our relatives and neighbors, but our mom and dad were looking at it as a grand adventure, and so was I. What was there to be afraid of? My daddy, my hero, was leading the way. My heart goes sad here. The memories. Ellie, I think had my father known what would have happened to us, he would have never accepted that job. Sometimes what we think is going to be so grand doesn't end up being grand at all. Something happened after he began to work with women who had no husbands and children who had no fathers. His daily working with them in their hardships stirred up fears and anger in the deepest part of his mind and heart. It took me years to understand, but I eventually came to realize his behavior was connected with his own dad, dying in a car and train crash. He was only 5 years old, and it was during the Depression. Remember when you wrote me about how you were learning about the Depression in school? It was a very difficult time for our country, and it touched everyone in some way. My father was the youngest of 4 children, and his mom had to take on boarders, people who rented out rooms to stay at their house. My grandma, or Nana as we called her, also took in other people's washing or helped out wealthier families with events. I don't know all what happened on in those years, but whatever it was, left a big wound in the heart of my daddy. Day by day, he came home from work anxious. At the supper table, he questioned my mom about what she would do if something happened to him. What will you and the children do? My mother would tell him what she did. The asking became demanding and bullish, and my mother would be visibly upset. I could not stand to see my father act like that. It was not at all like him. As my mother cried and tried to stutter out what she did, something rose in my own heart. It was a strong sense of courage and justice for my mother. I stood up and shouted at my father to stop being a bully, and darkness fell. I can write to you now with understanding, compassion, and forgiveness for my father, but back then it was terribly confusing and chaotic. It was like a storm that never stops but only gives momentary glimpses of light, a hope that it will soon be over only to cloud up again and bring a terrible tumult with it. The storm lasted 10 years, as my father took his anger out on me, his little teacup for speaking up. 10 years is a long time, especially for a child of 6. Through my elementary years and into high school, I lived in a world of unforeseen storms that regularly burst upon my family. For me, hope came at Christmas, because it had always been a favorite celebration of my parents, as well as us children. As a family, we had always hand-selected a Christmas tree from some Land my parents owned, and lights were stung on the Christmas tree, decorations hung and candy canes placed on the branches waiting to be removed on Christmas morning. There was nothing better than to suck on a candy cane as presents were opened. Now, there still were times of anger for my father, but it was not like the other times, at least in my own life. When it snowed, we would take walks as a family in the evening to look at the lights. Together we oohed and ahed and stored away the memories. My father made fires in the fireplace, and my mother made what seemed an endless supply of Christmas goodies. Coffee cakes and fruit cakes sent off to aunts and uncles, with some left for us and the neighbors and friends who stopped by. Christmas music floated from the console in the living room, giving us hours of listening enjoyment. Someone was always invited to share our table to celebrate Christmas. My mother usually was the one to select who would be the guest. Our guests were always filled to capacity and carried a small container of goodies home with them. Ellie, those were the finest of my memories, Christmases. It was good I had those memories, because eventually the darkness of my father's past pain and despair began to darken even our Christmases. The kind-natured man I had known as my hero and father became a Jekyll and Hyde of sorts. He could be kind and wonderful and in a moment become angry and abusive. Thankfully, he had loved his own mother well, and I never saw him lift a hand against her or my mother. It was to me, and occasionally one of my siblings, but it was to me who was the one that probably received the most brunt of his darkness and anger. Now, honey, I realize this is probably hard for you to read. I know how much you love me, and so I've not spoken of this before, so as to spare you from the sorrow and pain of knowing what I suffered as a child. But, dearest, it is time to know about my past in order to understand the great joy that fills me, especially at Christmas. So I go on with my story. The lights of Christmas always brought me such pleasure, and although family Christmas walks stopped, I would still go out in my little town all bundled up against the cold. I walked street after street to gaze at the lights of Christmas. I especially enjoyed it if the curtains of the home were open and I would look in, and the Christmas tree and families laughing, eating, or watching television. It was all so filled with light. I walked up and down the streets, past home after home, wishing I could see the same joy and love in the window of my home. Year after year, I walked those same streets with the same wonder and hope. But after Christmas, when all the lights were taken down, including ours, my life became dark again. I tried to hold on to the joy and hope the lights of Christmas brought, but I was unable to. And although my mother continued to make her famous goodies and the fires remained in the fireplace, it was not enough to keep the darkness away. Then, one day, not even during Christmas, but near the beginning of my 17th summer, I found something, or should I say, I actually found someone far brighter than the electrically charged lights of Christmas. I found the light of Christmas himself, the one who is the very center and reason for the entire celebration, Jesus Christ. He's the one whom God promised us in the Bible in Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Ellie, I could write you letter after letter about finding the love of God and how that changed my life. Yes, the birth of the babe, destined to be a sacrifice for all our darkness, transformed me. My darkness left, and I was filled with His glorious light. His light lasts forever because it comes from an eternal source, God. The hope this light gives is a living hope. It never dies because it is anchored in the living hope, Jesus. Yes, my heart and mind became new, and no Christmas has ever been the same. One of the best things is this light spread to my family, and both my father and mother later discovered the same light that never dies, that never goes dark. And although both have passed, they now live in the eternal light of the heavenly kingdom, and one day I will too. Now when I look at the lights of Christmas, it brings me even more joy and hope, because I have the light of Christmas in me all year long. In fact, Ellie, that light will be with me through all eternity. Many others have found Jesus, the light of love, and it is our hearts that shine in the dark as the lights of Christmas. As you celebrate Christmas this year, my dear, I am asking you to remember my story and this special saying: hearts are made bright with His love and His light. These are the true lights of Christmas. As always, loads of love from one who has been made bright by His love and His light, Great Aunt Lizzie. Emphasis on the great Jesus Christ the Lord. I hope you enjoyed this letter, and for those who have had difficult Christmases, who have felt separated, who have felt that darkness as I did, and it seems to come up during Christmas at times, and even in own families, people can remember Christmases differently. I am praying that you find the true light of Christmas, and that is Jesus Christ, born a babe in a manger for me and for you, lived, grew, and suffered on a cross to pay the penalty of our sin, but then rose again, which also promised us eternal life. It says in the Bible, the same Spirit that dwells in Christ will quicken our mortal bodies if that Spirit dwells in you, which means at any moment, anybody can make a choice and say, God, I know I'm in the darkness. I know there's no hope for me in this world. And I know that I am a sinner. What does sin mean? It basically means that we want to go our own ways, have our own plans, don't really want God to direct us. But do you know why He wants to direct us? Because He knows, because of our sin nature, we'll perish without His help. And that as good as we seem, as fine as the finest person that you can ever imagine out there, oil and water don't mix, and holiness and sin don't. So Jesus had to come as both God my dear ones, man. Thank you again for watching. As always, if you enjoyed this video, would you please like, share, and subscribe? And always, you can feel free to leave comments or contact me through my contact information in the description below the video.